It's the top of the show on Friday, and you know what that means. Gianno Caldwell, Republican strategist and contributor to TheHill.com, is back. Gianno, great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Before we discuss Hillary and her horrible policies, let's journey back for a moment. Last week, you said this fifth GOP debate that happened on Tuesday would be a make-it-or-break-it moment for Dr. Ben Carson. Without a stellar performance from him, his campaign might be cooked. So what did you think? Did he keep himself alive?
Yeah. Actually, he did, and I'm very pleased with what I saw at the debate. What I saw was an energized Dr. Ben Carson. What I saw is an individual that is engaged and actually knows foreign policy. Leading up to the debate, everyone said it. If Dr. Ben Carson had not performed well, he was out of there. This time, he was able to articulate his plan for destroying ISIS, which I thought was sensible. It made sense. You got to cut them off where they're getting their money. You got to cut off the propaganda machine. I thought it made a lot of sense. And in addition to that, if you notice, folks like Donald Trump, Hugh Hewitt, and others continue to say throughout the night, Dr. Ben Carson was right about that point. What do you think about that in terms of discussing it with other candidates? So I thought he did really well. I think the candidates on the stage thought he did really well, and I was very pleased with what I saw.
Yeah, and I particularly like, and this wasn't just in this debate, but in the four prior as well, I particularly like how he handles moderator questions when they're biased or when they're unfair. Yes. Because I think theoretically it was a fair question to ask him if he'd be able to wage war, because we don't know how he'd react in these situations. He comes off as very soft-spoken, very compassionate, but the way that Hugh Hewitt phrased that question, asking him if he'd be okay with the deaths of thousands of children, that was inappropriate, an inappropriate way to phrase that, and I thought Dr. Ben Carson handled that very well in how he responded to it. And I think it's moments like those that help him connect to the voters, and it's that connection to the voters that keep him alive. So I would agree with you on that point that he kept himself in the race, at least through the new year and hopefully to the Iowa caucuses. Now, before we move on to Hillary Clinton and her emails, let's talk about winners and losers from Tuesday real quick, because we haven't covered that with you yet. Did you have anybody that you thought came away on top?
Donald Trump performed very well. I mean, he is an individual who we always expect to dominate every conversation, and he did. And he looked very, in my opinion, presidential. So I really liked the way he responded to questions, even when there were criticisms to him, and Jeb Bush offered a lot of criticisms to him. He came off as funny. He came off as very engaging, and that's probably part of the reason why so many voters like him. They believe that he'll do what he actually says. He comes off as very tough, and people appreciate that, especially in this day and time. So Donald Trump, for sure, I thought was the biggest winner, and all the polls came out saying some of the same things. You know who I also thought who's very underrated and has always been underrated is Carly Fiorina. I think she has really good policy chops. Donald Trump may be like a salesman. She's an analyst, and she does very, very well there. I just wish I would see some bouncing in the polls when she puts on these great debate performances, because, I mean, this is typically what we've come to see of her. Marco Rubio, he did pretty well. He did fairly well. Chris Christie, obviously, he's been pushing his case because he's growing in the polls, and he was obviously able to get back on the big debate stage.
Yeah, I agree with you about Carly Fiorina. My frustration with her is that she hasn't been able to capitalize on her performances in the debate, when otherwise she's great. Her policies are great. She's such a phenomenal leader, but she hasn't been able to put that performance into her grassroots efforts. Let's move on to Hillary now. So Hillary Clinton proposed a 3-point plan to defeat ISIS recently. We heard the summary at the top of the segment. What did you think of her plan?
And before I get into that, just one last point on Carly Fiorina. I think she would make an awesome Secretary of State, because she seems like she knows that area very well. But moving on to Hillary Clinton, you know, when I heard her plan, I thought of it as a newborn baby. Very cute, but with no teeth. How do you have to cut ISIS off? You got to cut off their funding. They're generating about $4 billion in revenue. They have a staff of about 40,000 people right now. You gotta kill them when it comes to the net, because their propaganda machine is highly placed on the net, social media, Twitter. They're all over, and as you can see from reports all over, we got a lot of folks that are in the United States that are ISIS recruiters. You saw that recently in New York. I think it was a pizza shop owner who was a recruiter for ISIS. So in order to really defeat ISIS, it's not just a tactical boots on the ground mission. It's a mission where you're going to cut off their funds because they have a kidnapping operation. They have a bank robbing operation. You gotta get them with the oil, or like Donald Trump says, you gotta bomb the oil fields, and that's how you really defeat ISIS. And we didn't hear much of that from Hillary Clinton.
No, it doesn't seem realistic, and she certainly hasn't shown through her actions that she'd follow through on anything that would really stop them from operating around the world or here in the United States. Let's talk about her emails for a second.
Yes.
I know that some people are saying this is old news, that it's overly talked about, but there are some new reports about her emails that say that there are 2 top secret emails that have been found in her private email. Now, housing top secret information on anything other than a government server is a criminal act. Does this make her a criminal?
Yes.
It does.
Actually, it does. I mean, when she's convicted, we'll see that, and hopefully she will be convicted. And I tell you something, Hillary Clinton has something in common with 4 key people. That's Martha Stewart, Bernie Madoff, Scooter Libby, and one of the most famous, Governor Rod Blagojevich. If the FBI has asked her questions, whether she be under oath or not, and she's made some untrue statements, and we've seen her make untrue statements in the press when it came to a CNN interview when she said, hey, I've never been subpoenaed for my emails, and the Benghazi committee the next day showed the subpoena request. That was a lie. We see that when she's made other statements about, hey, I've never received any classified information, obviously, we know that that's a lie as well. So this situation has the grounds to put her in jail. And I think a number of folks, even on the Democrat side, they realize this. That's why you got folks like Martin O'Malley, who's still running for president on the Democrat side. Not necessarily did he think he can win on his own merits, but if Hillary Clinton goes to jail, that he would be the most likely guy to kind of take that spot as a moderate Democrat. So that's where we are now, and I think it's likely that we're going to see some charges come forth.
Right. Plus, there's a federal statute that says that any individual who steals federal property is disqualified from holding federal office. And it can be argued, she hasn't been charged with this yet, but it could be argued that Hillary Clinton did steal federal property just by housing that metadata on her private server rather than on the government server. So in your opinion, does that disqualify her from even being eligible to be running for president?
Yes, and you know what's really an honest assessment of this situation? If one of the Republicans on the stage, one of our guys or girls were accused of something like this, there's no question about it. They would be in jail right now. We wouldn't be having this discussion. We know what would be happening right now. So I tell you, I'm frankly surprised that the Clintons feel so bold to continue on running and dismissing this email probe when the FBI has gotten involved, and from what I'm told, they literally got in front of a table or got around the table and they discussed the case before deciding to pursue this as a criminal probe. So when you get into a situation like this and you're a presidential candidate, you should be very concerned about what's to come next, especially when it's been so publicized that things that you've said publicly happen to not be true.
Right. It's mind-boggling to me that any person in America, that the American voters would still even be considering electing her as president, given that there's an FBI investigation against her, that there's the common knowledge of what she's done to the American public in the media. It's just mind-boggling that anyone would want to elect her or consider supporting her. But we are out of time for today. Gianno, I appreciate you coming on the program, and I hope you have a very Merry Christmas.